Okay, well, welcome to episode 2 of In Pursuit of Talent. I am honoured and excited, delighted to have Neil Carberry, CEO of REC, joining me on this podcast. We're going to be talking about planning a workplace in a world where everything is changing. Purpose: to create rich, practical, forward-thinking content for managers and HR professionals and business leaders. Hi, Neil. I can't tell you how honoured I am to have you on my podcast, and I truly am. I haven't been to enough REC events over the last few years, but I was lucky enough to go to one relatively recently, and yeah, I'm honoured to have you here today. So I'm quite new to this podcast game, so I do have a script, so you're going to have to excuse me glancing down, whereas you're a seasoned podcastist and webinars and all the rest of it, so might need a bit of a hand holding, but I think for my clients and candidates and people out there in the recruitment world and people who are hiring, people want to hear really what you've got to say more than what I've got to say, to be completely honest. So anyway, welcome to In Pursuit of Talent.
Well, Lorraine, thank you very much for having me to start with. Yes, you haven't been to enough REC events. No one's ever been to enough REC events. I'd happily have a member at an event every single day. And as for prepped, well, yeah, people might say prepped. So others might say just says what comes to the top of his head in the moment. We'll let the listeners be the judge of that, I think. But really happy to be here. And, thank you for all the support Pursuit's given the REC over the years as well.
Oh, thank you. And if we get time at the end, I'm also lucky to have you at my Women in Leadership next Thursday, which again is very exciting to have you there then. But I'll kick off with some questions, Neil. So here we go. Right. Okay. So Neil, you've led the REC through some generally turbulent times. What's shaped your thinking on the future of work more than anything else?
I think there are two things that really I use as touchstones, and particularly around things like AI, but also demographic change. Smaller generations coming into the workforce now is another big factor that businesses are having to work through. And the two things are these. One, we've done this before. We've done big tech, big economic change, and we know we get through it. And actually, we know it doesn't eliminate work. What it does is it reshapes work. And you already see some of the the outriders of the West Coast in the United States starting to resile from that "it's the end of jobs" narrative. And I think that's a case for optimism about where we are. And we should feel comfortable that we are going to continue to throw off opportunities for people to contribute, to grow, to build great lives for themselves and to build great businesses. But one of the reasons I really didn't like that a few years ago is the other thing that I'm very focused on, which is I actually think it's really lazy thinking. Because the problem is not that there isn't going to be any work. The problem is, what sort of work are we going to be creating? And for that, the other touchstone for me is, we talk about the Luddites. I'm a first-degree historian. We talk about the Luddites and protesting against the mechanization of the textile industry. And, Luddite's a bit of a term of abuse today. It's somebody who's against the march of progress. But it's worth remembering that the Luddites weren't wrong. Yes, in aggregate, the economy got bigger. We did really well. The UK and then the rest of the world industrialized at a pace. But if you were actually a Luddite, your life did get pretty bad pretty quickly. The job you were used to was disrupted, and it took us 50 years of factory acts and so forth in the 19th century to get that balance between labor and capital back right. So for me, I think we're at a real inflection point of the future of work right now, where every single business in the world's operating model is going to change. It's going to change because of lack of labor supply. It's going to change because of the march of AI. It's going to change because consumer markets are changing quickly. And right now, there's a huge opportunity for us as people professionals, whether we're talent acquisition or recruitment or HR, to lean in and make sure that we get all of those benefits we got in the 19th century from industrialization, and we minimize the wasted potential the heat that was thrown off rather than the light in the Industrial Revolution. I think right now, this is a moment of huge opportunity for people in HR and talent. And we have to find a way to grasp it. And that's a big challenge, but it's a super exciting one. And when we think about the future of work, that dominates the skyline for me.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, there's a few more questions about AI as we go on. And yeah, I'm still a little bit on the fence with it. I mean, as a recruiter, one of the issues that we've seen is you get a CV for a candidate, it almost matches the job we're recruiting for, word for word. Then you start interviewing them. So from the skills as a recruiter, interviewing people has become quite tough. You're having to really make sure that you're questioning the candidates, because we've had it more than once now that somebody has gone on an interview, and when they're in front of the client, it's quite different being in front of a client and in front of a recruiter. It's sad that candidates see it like that, but they do, and then they fall apart because they've but I do think it's sliding away a little bit. Okay, so when you look at the workplace right now, AI, hybrid working, flexibility, skills shortages, what are the forces you think leaders are most underestimating? Hybrid, yeah, I'll share my thoughts after yours.
So I think we need to remember that productivity comes from effective systems, and effective systems require human connection. So I think hybrid as a model is here to stay, and it broadly works, but we've talked about it in the wrong terms for the last few years. So the debate is largely pastiched from one side as being about managers who just want to manage by vision. I want to be able to see people. I want you to come in because that way I can control you. And on the other side, people at home lazily not working because they're not being seen. And actually, the challenge is in the middle, which is, I mean, I'm at home today because I'm doing some work on the REC board papers, and that needs a bit of that sort of time. And I'm super productive at home like that. But so a lot of my job is like that. It's not about my personal productivity in the tasks I'm doing. It's about how I enable others. We also know from some of the work, for instance, that Bruce Daisley did, that if you're doing a customer contact type job and you have that bad call, it takes you much longer to get over it in the at home than it does in the office, because in the office you let off steam with colleagues. You go for a cup of coffee and you go for a biscuit and you talk to your mate, and then it simmers down and you get back on with it. There's a whole piece about mental health, not just the cognitive load of Teams calls, but connection. A lot of lonely people developing it. So there's a whole piece here about how we as employers understand what drives productivity in our businesses, and I think it does require more connection. So we need a more mature debate about what the workplace is for. Into that, you have to insert the fact that we do need people to develop into new and different roles. That requires in-person connection. And then we've got this whole retooling about, you've said you're a bit of a skeptic on some aspects of AI. I mean, I just think that AI is throwing off a load of noise at the moment. And in there somewhere, there's some really transformational stuff. But actually, anyone who says they know precisely where that is in 15 or 20 years' time is a liar. The way I view it is, and I have a slide that basically puts the 6 biggest companies in the world up by market capitalization. And they are all American tech firms. And 5 of them build everything they're doing on the technology of the 6th, because the 6th is NVIDIA, who are doing all the hardware for AI. When you add the market cap of those 6 firms up, it's bigger than the gross domestic product of the People's Republic of China. Now, China made everything you own and everything I own, Lorraine. So as an economist, I know that cannot be right. That's a hell of a punt by private capital on AI transforming the world. So there is a bubble here, and that bubble will burst. But think of it like the dot-com bubble. You remember in 1990, 2000, we had all these dot-com
businesses. Yes, I do.
Getting loads of money, super high valuations. And then in 2001, we had that crash. And of course, what happened then is no one ever bought anything on the internet ever again. No.
Hmm.
So then that's the way to think about AI is we can't tell at the moment what the sustainable long-term picture is, but we know AI is in it. And therefore, in the market broadly, both for candidates, for workers once they're hired, for employers, this thing about what is fluff versus what is genuinely a signal is important. So you talked about properly qualifying candidates these days being a challenge. The value that Pursuit offers clients and that any good recruitment business offers clients is being able to say, actually, here's a group of candidates and we do know them and we do know they match. As opposed to a group of candidates where that is much more variable because time is an asset for clients. So that thing about how in this world do we as professional services firms and as professional services professionals in HR make ourselves much more about being the signal amongst the noise rather than contributing to the noise. That feels to me like where the competitive advantage is for almost all of us. And for HR leaders inside businesses, I think that in terms of people planning is an incredibly important way to think about establishing what you want to try and make a difference on most.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people were really frightened about AI to start with, so the head goes in the sand, and so I think I've rolled out a couple of workshops on AI. Some people have, can't wait to get through the door and sit down and listen to what people want to talk about, and other clients just simply just didn't want to come, and I think that's how it sits out there at the moment.
Yeah.
But as you
Well,
say,
the other thing
it will
is
be
clients.
interesting.
The other thing is clients need to understand if you're not gripping it and setting the rules for AI use in your business, your staff probably are using it. And
Mm,
actually, what worries me is cybersecurity exposure from that.
mm. Okay. Okay. Right. You've spoken about how too many businesses treat people as a component rather than a strategic asset. Can you unpack that? And what does that look like in practice? Christ, these are meaty questions, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I mean, I expect nothing less than the proper Jeremy Paxman taking apart Lorraine.
Where has
Um,
he gone? Where has he
uh,
gone?
Off
I
to
don't.
do podcasts, probably that's what they all do, isn't it? I look, we had REC Live a couple of weeks ago, and I said, look, the way British business does talent broadly has failed, and I think it's twofold. One is, for about 40 years, we had a pretty loose labour market where the labour market was pretty flexible, pretty loose. It tended to be able to supply people. And the driving factors behind that, yes, free movement in the European Union was part of it. But actually, the baby boom generation was a
Mhm.
huge part of it. My favourite fact, and you've undoubtedly heard it before, Lorraine, is once you understand that 50% more babies were born in Britain in 1964 than 1977, you understand everything that's going on with the tightening of our labour force right now. So there are fewer people. We've got the feedstock we've got. We're not going to make the country wealthy digging it out of the South Wales coalfields now. We're going to make it wealthy in a services led economy. So people really matter to productivity. And when you look globally, and it's easy to compare to Europe because Europe has a different model of labor markets. But actually, I like to compare to the United States, which has a model that's different in the other direction. People in Britain think of US employment as well as very transactional.
It's very. It's in it. It's so different. It's incredibly different. I mean, even like notice periods people don't have to hardly give any notice in the US, even no matter what level you're at, whether at your level or whatever level. Yeah, you can just say, I'm out of here.
If you look at that, then I remember doing some work 15 years ago on wholesale technology adoption, as in technology adoption in the wholesale industry in the US and the UK. And British firms and American firms spent the same amount. American firms got 15 to 20% more out of it.
There's a
Because
surprise.
we've got a problem, and that problem is we don't deploy very well, and we don't deploy very well because we do not do the total sorry, geekish, you can down, do the total factor productivity. It's not what the labor does or what the machines do, it's about how they work together. So that management challenge of treating HR not as something we have to do for compliance or something we do because we're nice, but actually is something that is about guiding the operating model of the business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you see that, you can see that bluntly in our sector, Lorraine, because I look to Europe and yes, margins for recruiters are chunkier there. They're also chunkier in the United States. Because what's happened in this country is we view people as a resource to be bought. I quite often say, if people are your greatest resource, why do you procure them like you procure your paper clips? We give it to finance and then to procurement, and they try and squeeze the cost, squeeze the cost, squeeze the cost. Because in doing that, they are winning against their goal, which is lower cost of recruitment in year. We're doing some work to reprice some old REC work this summer, but for me, the goal is not that. The goal is, what is the upside of having the right people, the right team, using the technology well? And that's where I think there's a big task for HR because, excuse me, we have parts of the profession have allowed themselves to be seen as somehow the fun police or compliance primarily, or worst drivers of certain social agendas. That's not what HR is about. HR is about performance and productivity.
100%.
And getting back to that is really important. Not because actually I think it will make people see the importance of buying recruitment on value rather than price, although I think it will do that. Because actually, as a patriot, I'd like our economy to be getting the kind of productivity that the Americans are getting and that some of the Europeans are getting out of the sort of investment we're doing in AI right now.
I think as well, just on HR, I mean, I've been in recruitment 35 years, and I had my career started in London, and I worked with lots of different HR people, and I feel sad for so many of them that they are seen as they're there, they still have that, they're there to just sort out a problem or a compliance problem or a legal issue. An HR person is such an integral part of the business, and if they're used in the right way, and the CEOs use them in the right way, the difference they can make is quite significant in the sort of people they're bringing into the business, because the CEO might want some certain person, but if they use the HR person in the right way, it can be very different. That's what I've seen. I've seen the change in HR though from, the last 35 years. An HR person, what they are, they have evolved, and that role has evolved dramatically. Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's still too much. This is something that the chair of the CIPD talked about in a speech recently, which is we need to diverge the function from the profession. The profession done well is transformational, and it's really important that we focus on, well, what does the profession done well look like? Because that's what builds the impact of the function.
Now, these podcasts go like that, and the amount of questions I have, we're not going to get through them, but that mentioning that just brings me on to obviously the sad thing for us recruiters that you are moving on from the REC to the CIPD. So trying to get you on a podcast in the next year is going to be probably quite tough, but I know from my Women in Leadership next week that you're coming to, that there's a lot of HR people. I'm hoping they're not going to be homing in on that too much, and we're talking about the here and now. But do you want us to talk a little bit about that, because I know there's a lot of sadness around you leaving the REC, because I've seen the change. I know I said at the beginning I don't go to as many events, but I've seen the change, and I probably wouldn't have maybe still been there if it wasn't for sort of some of the changes that you made. But do you want to just tell us a little bit about that, Neil? Because I think some of my clients will be quite interested to hear about that.
Well, lovely for you to say that about the REC, Lorraine.
Well, it's true.
I think we've been on a great journey, and I'm leaving a great team, and very hopeful that we're making a really strong appointment as my successor, which I can't say anything about just yet, but it's going pretty well. I'm a great believer that organizations like the REC and the CIPD belong to their members. The great joy of being chief exec is that the shareholders and the customers are the same people. With that comes sort of a view that you've got to take a strong view on your own mortality as the leader. I think if you stay too long, you make it about you. So I was already thinking, I'm just over 8 years into the REC. probably don't want to go much beyond 10 years. So I was beginning to enter kind of whatever the pit stop window for chief execs is into that space. And feeling like actually the REC is on good grounding now, and it's a nice shape to hand on. And, the REC's centenary is in 2030. And I knew I wasn't going to get there. So I wanted to give that over to a successor who could take us to that and make it a really important and big thing. And then the CIPD called, and this is sort of the other half of my career. I've been a member of the CIPD for 25 years. I've been a fellow for at least 15. My professional background away from recruitment is in employee relations, which is, suddenly getting sexy again after 40 years with the passage of the Employment Rights Act and all those new trade union powers. And I went to see them and said, look, I just think there's a great moment of opportunity for the CIPD here with everything that's changing. But probably the CIPD that is successful in that world isn't the CIPD that's been successful in the last 20 or 30 years. And the board of the CIPD absolutely see that. And so when I arrive in September, I think my job is really to take what has been a super successful professional body for decades and bring us into a new world where, people thinking and people planning is more under challenge than ever, but also more important than ever. And really backing the profession to step up into this world and help our members make a difference. And that feels like a really good new 5 to 10 year challenge for me. So the choice to go now is basically that the right thing has arrived. But I'm super proud of everything we've done at the REC. I genuinely love the recruitment industry. I love our energy. I love the fact that we all love the chase. And I think
never stop chasing in recruitment.
No, absolutely not.
Well, I haven't.
Well, look, we're talking about, hopefully the chair of the REC won't mind me saying this on your podcast. We're talking about the recruitment of the new chief executive of the REC, and we're at that delicate stage where we just need to get it landed now. And I am very switched on to this because one of the epochal moments of my early recruitment career in the 1990s was losing a candidate, a £25,000 placement, was doing search, because they didn't turn up on the first day.
Yeah.
And you learn.
Been there.
You
learn quick.
Yeah.
There.
And so and I think that kind of, there's a rawness and a reality to the recruitment and staffing sector that I both love and will miss. But also, it's a bit like being a captain of a ship in the Royal Navy. I see my self-image, if I like to say, is basically Jack Aubrey in Master and Commander. That's how I see myself. And so it's just about me handing the ship over in good shape to someone else. And once that someone else steps onto the deck, they will have the stripes on their arm, and they will have all the strengths and opportunities that I had as chief exec of the REC, in the same way as I will have the stripes on my arm at the CIPD. The office gives you the authority and the ability to make some change, and then it's about what you're willing to do with it. And the truth is, for REC members like yourself, Lorraine, you probably do need someone who will use that for the next 5-10 years rather than a shorter vision than I would have. And CIPD members need that too, and they'll get that from me. And a kind of, the other thing is, if REC members really want clients to understand how important recruitment and staffing is, at some level, I'm pretty sure the chief exec of the CIPD being an ex-recruiter and ex-chief exec of the REC is a good thing.
I think so. And I think, I'm one of these silly people that like talking about politics, and I know I've got my filming people behind me saying 3 minutes, but there's just and we haven't got time to talk about this. But on the news this morning, they're saying the last 3 months in the States has been huge growth, and I just think, well, how is that? But we haven't got time. We've run out of time. But I just thought,
ever. believe first cut economic statistics.
Okay.
Secondly, to be honest, as someone who was in Boston with the Tartan Army for a week 2 weeks ago, I can guarantee that at least 50% of that is the amount of money we put through the Boston hospitality industry.
Okay. Yeah, you know when you just think, how can that be? How can that be? Yeah, world's a funny place right now, but as I say, we've been here before, and we'll just stay strong. Neil, I'll
Absolutely.
see you next Thursday.
I'm looking forward to it.
Sorry,
And one thing I'd say before we finish,
you're not going to
optimism.
ask for directions on the podcast. No.
No, optimism is always a good thing, because right now British businesses and British households are sitting on cash, and they're sitting on cash because they're feeling pessimistic. The economy grows when they feel a bit optimistic. That's the difference with the United States. And if you look at the last year, the world economy has navigated the Trump tariffs and the war in the Gulf vastly better than dismal economists like me thought it might. There are lots of reasons to be optimistic about this country, and it's time we stop leaning into a declinist narrative. Britain is great. The economy is doing fine. And actually, if we started to believe that, we'd do even finer.
We do even better. Yeah, I get you, and I agree. Neil, thanks. As I say, just great to have you here, an honour, and I'll see you next week.
I'm
See you
looking
later.
forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Bye.